I'm going to cover some really basic rules of composition for surf photography in particular. I'm not going to go into too much detail, and there's lots and lots of resources out there if you want to dig into this in real detail and find out all about the different things I'm talking about. But let's cover them really quickly just so you've got an idea. If this is your first time encountering them, then it might be really useful for you. So there's the rule of thirds. So divide your frame into thirds vertically and horizontally, and then try and put horizontal lines on those horizontal third lines and vertical lines on the vertical ones, and subjects of real interest, i.e. surfers, waves, put them on where the points where those lines meet, the little crosses. Pretty much every piece of post-processing software like Adobe Lightroom and everything else will have a guide that you can drop onto the image that will let you align things to that grid basically. And it's just a way of making photos slightly more interesting. It's definitely not something you should follow at all times 100%, but it does mean it's a little something to keep in your mind when you're shooting line-up photos or even action photos. Just to make your photo a little bit more interesting is move the subject out from, don't put them bang in the middle of the shot, move them away a little bit. So when I see a photo that has the subject right in the middle, unless it's really obvious that person has composed that photo to make sure that elements align, there's something about it that means, well, that is obvious why they put that person in the middle, or that subject in the middle. I think, well, maybe I always kind of, in my mind, I'm kind of mentally cropping it in a different way. But that's because I'm kind of used to this photography technique called the rule of thirds. So try it out, see how you feel. I think it's one of the first things that every photographer kind of reads about and tries out. And you'll notice it a lot in any sort of creative photo or video. You'll notice this kind of technique coming around because it just naturally looks good to the eye. So other things which I think fit nicely into surf photography and things that you can keep in mind really easily are people in photos tend to draw the eye. So if you've got a lineup shot and you want people to concentrate on one element of that shot, or you think one element of that shot is the most appealing piece, if you've got a group of people which are far away from that, that's going to draw people's eye away from it. If you've got perhaps people dotted in which kind of lead your, in a pattern which leads your eye towards the wave or the surfer, that can be really good because you're naturally, as a human, your eyes drawn to other human figures, and then they'll naturally draw their eye across. One of the other common ones with that type of thing, leading lines, is what you might call for it if you want to Google it, to look up a bit more. A lot of people in Western cultures at least tend to scan from left to right. So if you've got a line coming from the left going across to the right, and put the thing that you want people to look at the end of that line, and they'll naturally go towards it. And these concepts are things that you don't necessarily plan for too much. It's hard to plan for that kind of thing when you're taking a surf action photo, but it's something that you can recognize in your photos afterwards and crop appropriately or select the one which fits this thing. I think don't worry too much about trying to contrive a situation in order to get all these elements lined up. A lot of landscape photographers and things do things like that, but surf's a bit of a different game because it's the ocean and unpredictable. So I tend to look through my photos afterwards, because I've normally got a few hundred photos from a session, and I'll find ones which naturally your eye might well be drawn to them anyway, but I'll find ones which have this kind of element going through it, and I'll pick those out as my selected images to share with other people. So that's one thing. I think filling the frame is a really good beginner's tip. Again, it's one that you might want to disregard in the name of creativity. If you see an image which you'd rather have a lot of empty space in the image, a lot of negative space in the image, then go for it. But I like suggesting that people, when they're getting into surf photography at least, fill the frame with the thing that's most interesting. Cut out anything that's dull or boring or distracting and just fill it with the thing. If you can think, if there's one thing in your image which you want people to concentrate on, fill the frame with that thing. And that might be lines of swell. So it might be a big area or physical area that you want to fill the frame, which is totally understandable. Or it might be one person doing a tight maneuver on a surfboard, and then zoom right into that. But I think it's a good rule of thumb is to fill the frame with the thing that you want that person to look at. And these are just the ones that kind of pop out to me as I'm going through my photos most often. And there are hundreds and hundreds of different rules of composition and rules. They're not really rules, but obviously you can break them. I quite like also something that comes up a lot in surf photography is parallel lines. And I'll show you an example of a couple, but so lines of swell obviously are like one of the most common things that we'll see. So if you can get high up and you can get that shot of the lines stacked to the horizon, then that kind of thing is really appealing, I think, to surfers especially, but to humans in general, is things being in order, seeing multiple things lining up. And waves are a classic example of things that are, although they're completely unpredictable and completely unique, they are things that happen over and over again in roughly the same place. And I think that's make a really compelling image and give you something to make your shot stand out. Another one that I really like is putting the action in context. So if you've got, if there is a car park in the foreground of a wave, that's quite a nice shot sometimes, because it lets people know that this is a busy spot, and it tells you something about the action that's happening. I really like it when if you've got a good, if there's people in the water with a good rapport, if there's a group of friends in the water, then often there'll be, someone will be claiming the wave. Or I like if there's one person in, that's great. I love the shots of lineups where there's one person. I think they're 1,000 times better than no people, and also much better than lots of people. I think if you can nail it with just this one person paddling in, there's a wave breaking and there's only one guy in. Isn't that everyone's dream as a surfer? Well, no, it's not. But it's my personal dream as a surfer is to get perfect waves. I'm the only one in. I mean, there's a photographer on the beach, but there's no one else surfing. I can take whichever wave I want. So I love that kind of thing, and I really go out of my way to try and compose images where I can see one person. Maybe there's one guy paddling out. Maybe there's one guy about to paddle into a wave, and I think that really reflects my kind of personality, and it's one of those things that brings the viewer my point of view, and that's why I think I like the 35mm focal length when I'm shooting in the water, and it's why I like to compose things where there's one person. And I like it's one of those things. You'll find these things yourself, and the things I'm talking about now aren't necessarily what you should go for, but you should look into similar concepts of composition, and I will put a link there, and you can go through, and there's like I say, there's hundreds to choose from, and you'll probably find one or two that resonate with you and that will enable you to highlight the photos that you like the most. And if you like them the most, then you're more likely to show them off, and you're going to put them on your wall, you're going to show other people, and you're going to be able to talk about them like I'm talking about some of these photos now, and hopefully that's really going to come across in the way that you present your photos. I think that's one of the things that can get lost if you're using a kind of scattergun approach to try and when I was first into surf photography, I was like, I'm just going to shoot everything I possibly can, every different type of photo. I want to get in the water, I want a fisheye, I want a long lens in the water, I want all of this stuff. But I think you might be at that stage right now, and it was an amazing place to be at, but I think I've honed in on, and you will too, hone in on what you like. And in order to do that, you need to experiment, and you need to practice, and you need to look through your photos with a critical eye. And I think rules of composition, that's probably the most valuable time for a rule of composition. For me, it's not when you're on the beach and racking your brain to think, am I supposed to have 3 things in this shot because odd numbers are good, and there's a 4th thing there, but maybe there's a leading line. I don't worry about that when I'm actually shooting. I tend to just make sure you've got an interesting angle. Simple as that. Then when I'm looking back through my photos, that's when these rules of composition come into their own in terms of separating out the ones that you really like from the ones that perhaps you don't like as much. And that could be totally different to what someone else thinks of that session. So this is a really personal thing, I think, composition. Have a look at some of the stuff, take on board what I said, and if you think that was going to work for you, then use it. If not, revisit some other rules and see what works for you.